Hey guys, welcome back to our lecture on Indian Contract Act. So let's continue the topic of performance of contract. In this topic, you'll be learning about contracts which need not be performed. So in the earlier video, you were learning about who should be performing a contract, how should it be performed, what happens to one party when he is willing to perform a contract and the other party refuses, right? Now you'll be learning about what are those contracts which need not be performed. So let's start with the first one, novation. So what is novation? Novation is nothing but substitution of an old contract with a new contract. It so happens that when parties enter into a contract, later the terms of the contracts can be changed or the parties to the contract can be changed, right? In such cases, when there is a change, when the old contract is substituted with a new contract, that is called as novation. In case of novation, the old contract is discharged. That means the old contract need not be performed, but the new contract should be performed. So what is novation? Novation is nothing but substitution of a new contract in the place of old contract. And on novation, the old contract is discharged and need not be performed. As I said, you'll be learning about what are those contracts which need not be performed. In case of novation, when a new contract takes effect, the old contract need not be performed. So old contract will be discharged. So let's understand with one example. So introduction of a new partner. So here you'll be understanding one example pertaining to Partnership Act. So here in this example, there is one partnership firm ABC and Co. There are three partners. So A, B and C. So date of formation of this firm is 1st January 2018 and there is a new partner D. So there is a new partner called D. So when partnership needs more resources, more people to manage the business, they can call in more people and the person who is entering the firm will become a new partner, right? Now D will be joined as a new partner in this firm. The date of joining this new partner is on 1st June 2018. So general rule, when a new partner is introduced, we are basically talking about the liability. It says D will be liable from the date of admission, that is 1st June 2018. That means from 1st January 2018 till 1st June 2018, the firm would have contracted few debts, right? Will the new partner be liable for the old debts, that means prior to the date of admission? No, right? As a general rule in Indian Partnership Act, the new partner will be liable for the debts only incurred from the date of admission and not prior to this. But this rule can always be varied because partnership is based on agreement. The partners are free to have their own terms and conditions governing the firm. So the rule can be there can be an exception or there can be a variation in this rule which says D can be made liable to the earlier debts. What is earlier debts? That is prior to 1st June, which is the date of introduction, subject to consent of the new partner, that is D, and the consent of the creditor. Now remember, in the first contract, that means let's say this contract A, B and C had to pay 1 lakh rupees to the creditor. So this was the old contract. The contract was between the partnership firm consisting of A, B and C and the creditor. Now the second contract, when D is agreeing to be liable for the prior debts, that is prior to the date of his introduction, then there will be 4 parties, A, B, C plus D, right? Now this is a contract with creditor. So is there any change in this old contract and new contract? Yes, in the old contract there were only 3 parties, whereas in the new contract there are 4 parties. When any change in terms and conditions or change in parties happen, the old contract is substituted by the new contract and the old contract will be discharged and the new contract will come into effect. So this is called as novation. So next, moving on to rescission. What is rescission? It means cancellation. So when a contract is cancelled due to certain changes, either by mutual consent of both the parties or by non-performance of a party, that is called as rescission of contract or cancellation of contract. So at the time of entering into contract, both the parties wanted to perform their respective obligation for receiving any consideration. But later on, before the date of performance or on the date of performance, both the party mutually decide, let's not perform our respective obligation. On such cases, the contract comes to an end or it is discharged. The contract need not be performed. Second situation is by non-performance of an obligation by one party. So if one party, let's say the seller fails to sell his car, that is fails to transfer the possession and the ownership of the car, whereas B, that is the buyer who is still willing to buy the car, he can rescind the contract due to non-performance by the seller. So this is called as cancellation. Here remember, only the old contract is cancelled and no new contract comes into existence. Whereas in novation there are two contracts, old contract and new contract. In case of rescission, when you're cancelling a contract, the contract comes to an end and there is no new contract coming into existence. Let's understand this with the example. So here you're understanding cancellation of contract by non-performance of one party. So here there is seller, there is buyer. So seller had to sell the car but he failed to deliver. So when you say sell the car, it means to transfer the ownership and possession of the car to the buyer. If seller fails to perform his obligation on the date of performance, then the buyer can rescind the contract. So this is called as rescission of contract by non-performance of one party. Next, effect of alteration. So alteration means changing the terms and conditions of the contract. So it says where the parties to a contract agree to alter the terms of the original contract is rescinded. So here when the terms and contracts at the date of contract, let's say the date of contract is 1st June 2018 and date of alteration is 15 June 2018 and date of performance is 1st July 2018. There are 3 dates here. First, the date of contract was 1st June 2018. Later, in between, that is the date of performance and date of contract, the terms and conditions were altered by mutual consent of both the parties. In such cases, the old contract need not be performed, but the new contract with the changed terms and conditions will be performed. So let's take one example. Here seller and buyer again. So seller, he had the obligation of selling 10 kgs of sugar. So this was the original contract. So the date of contract was 1st June 2018, right? Next, the date of performance, as I said, was 1st July 2018. So this was the original contract. Later, there was a change in terms and conditions. When did the change happen? Date of alteration is 15 June 2018. So what terms and conditions could be changed? Here, for example, instead of delivering 10 kgs of sugar, the buyer wanted 20 kgs of sugar. Is there a change in terms and condition? Yes, the quantity has changed and obviously the total amount to be paid by the buyer to the seller will also change. Another change could be to be sent in installments. So earlier, delivery of 10 kg at once was the contract. Later, the terms and conditions was changed. Instead of 10 kgs, 20 kgs to be delivered, and this delivery should be happening in installments. So this is the new contract. Now, on the date of performance, the old contract will be changed. That is, the contract to sell 10 kgs will be cancelled, but the contract to sell 20 kgs of sugar in installments will come into effect. So this is the effect of alteration. Remember, in alteration and novation, they are similar, but in novation what happens? There could be change in terms and conditions or change in the parties. But whereas in alteration, there is no change in the parties, but there is only change in the terms and conditions. So this is the difference between novation and alteration. Next, moving on to remission. So it says promisee may waive or remit performance of promise. So remit or waive means to give away right in the contract. It could be either a whole right or partial right. So it says every promisee may dispense with or remit wholly or in part. As I said, the whole performance can be remitted or to give away, or only a portion of the obligation can be remitted. May extend time for such performance. Let's say the time of contract was 1st July 2018. The other party gives additional time for the party, say you need not perform on July due to certain conditions. I'll give you 15 more days to perform. In such cases is also called as remission. Or may accept instead of it in any satisfaction he thinks fit. So let's understand with the help of an example. Here there are two parties A. that is the creditor, B is the debtor. So creditor has given 1 lakh rupees to B. That means B has taken a loan of rupees 1 lakh from the creditor. Now the obligation of B is to pay entire 1 lakh, right? So what he does is, debtor goes to creditor and says, due to certain emergency conditions or due to non-availability of funds, I cannot pay you 1 lakh. As of now, I have only 80,000 rupees. Now it is up to the creditor to either accept the debtor's condition and give away the right of receiving remaining 20,000, or he can claim entire amount. So when the person, that is a creditor, is giving away the right to an extent, either in whole or in part, that is called as remission, right? Now when debtor is just paying 80,000 instead of 1 lakh rupees, the creditor is remitting rupees 20,000 to be received from the debtor. So this is called as remission. In case of remission, you know the contract was to pay 1 lakh rupees, but the promisee is agreeing to lesser amount of promise. In such cases, it is called as remission. Next, moving on to restoration of benefit under a voidable contract. So what is voidable contract? Voidable contract means a contract where free consent is vitiated by either coercion or undue influence or fraud or misrepresentation, right? So the party who has suffered a loss due to any of these factors, he can rescind the contract. That means in the initial, that is the date of contract, he would have agreed to perform the obligation, but later he rescinds the contract. In such cases, it becomes a voidable contract. So the provision says, when a person at whose option a contract is voidable rescinds it, the other party who has performed coercion or undue influence or fraud or misrepresentation need not perform the promise. This is the first provision. Next, the party rescinding a voidable contract shall, if it received any benefit, such benefit shall be from another party, such benefit shall be restored to the other party. So let's take one example. There are two parties here, A and B. So the contract between A and B is to sell house property. Now B is the seller and A is the buyer. So now buyer, he is exercising coercion on seller, saying you have to sell your house property at less than market value. So obviously, as a seller, if you were a seller, you would not sell the house property at less than the market value because your profits would be affected, right? But buyer is effecting coercion on seller, that is, he is threatening to kill him or damage his property if he does not sell his house property at less than market value. Due to this coercion, seller, that is B, has agreed to sell the house at less than market value, that is at the initial, that is on the date of contract, he has agreed. So the seller has already received rupees 2 lakhs as advance, but later he rescinds the contract. That means he says, I do not want to perform my obligation, that is I do not want to sell my house at less than market value. So this is called as a voidable contract. Now here already seller has received 2 lakh rupees, right, but he is later cancelling the contract. So the provision says, when any party is rescinding a contract which is due to coercion or undue influence or misrepresentation or fraud, if he has received any benefit from the other party, the benefit received should be paid back to the other party. So this is the understanding of this provision. Next provision, obligation of person who has received advantage under a void contract. So similarly, the provisions are similar to a voidable contract and void contract. So what is void contract? Any contract which cannot be enforced. So there is also an agreement called as void ab initio, right? That means an agreement which is unenforceable right from the beginning. But what is a void contract? Void contract means a contract which was valid at the time of entering into contract, but later it becomes void due to impossibility of performance. So what could be the example? Let's say on the date of contract to sell the car, that was 1st June 2018, the car, that is a subject matter which is car, which was valid. But before the date of performance, that is 1st July 2018, the subject matter is destroyed. Now, can buyer force seller to sell this car because it's already destroyed? No, right? So such contract is called as a void contract. Now, if the seller has received some advance from the buyer, let's say 50% of the total amount is received as advance. Now he is not performing the contract, right, because the subject matter is destroyed, something which is beyond the control of both the parties. In such cases of a void contract which cannot be enforced, if the seller has received any benefit or if any party has received any benefit under a void contract, the same benefit should be given back to the person who has given such benefit. So this is the understanding of this provision. Next, moving on to effects of neglect of promisee to afford promisor reasonable facilities for performance. So the provision says, if any promisee neglects or refuses to afford the promisor reasonable facilities for performance of his promise, then the promisor is excused by such neglect or refusal to any non-performance. One example which you have learnt in the previous video. So there were two parties, one is A, one is B. So A is the contractor, B was the person who wants his house to be constructed by the contractor. For contractor to perform his obligation, proper material should be supplied, right? And also the place to construct the house should be given to the contractor. If these facilities are not given by the other party, then obviously the contractor cannot perform his obligation, right? In case he is unable to perform the obligation, the other party who has not provided facilities cannot sue him for non-performance of his obligation. So this is the understanding of this provision. So let's quickly revise what are the contracts which need not be performed. Firstly, it was novation. What is novation? Substitution of an old contract with a new contract. When there is a change in terms and conditions or change in the parties, the old contract gets discharged and the new contract will be effected. Therefore, the old contract need not be performed. What is rescission? Rescission is nothing but cancellation. Cancellation can happen either by mutual consent of the parties or by non-performance of one party's obligation. Third is alteration. Alteration means change in the terms and condition. What was the difference between novation and alteration? Novation, there could be change in the terms and conditions or between the parties, but in case of an alteration, only the terms and conditions are altered but the parties remain the same. Next, promisee may waive or remit performance. So here we were talking about remission. So the promisee can remit either the whole performance or partial performance by the promisor. Next, restoration of benefit under the voidable contract. If a person is cancelling the contract which is effected due to coercion or undue influence or misrepresentation or fraud, when he has received some benefit at the time of contract and later is cancelling the contract, the same benefit should be restored to the person who has given such benefit. Next, the same in case of a void contract. So what is a void contract? At the time of entering into a contract it was valid, but later due to certain subsequent impossibility of performance, one example could be destruction of the subject matter. In such cases where contract cannot be performed and one person has already received some form of benefit from the other party, the benefit received should be given back. Last one, communication of rescission. When a contract is cancelled, the same should be communicated to the other party. Last, effect of neglect of promisee to afford reasonable facilities. If one party has to perform an obligation, the other party, if he had to provide certain facilities, if the facilities are not provided by the other party, then obviously one party cannot be performing the obligation. So these were the provisions on contracts which need not be performed. So with this, we'll be concluding the topic. In the next topic, you'll be learning about discharge of contracts. Thank you.